So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's session, where we will be discussing how to get into the cybersecurity profession. I'm Natasha Harley, and I'm VP for WeSys UK and co-founder of Cyber Experts. As a recruitment professional specialised in the security industry, I'm often asked by newcomers, how do I get in? What certification should I take? Or what options or roles are available? There isn't really one answer for all. And the truth is, it really depends on your personal circumstances, your background and your core skills. And also, sort of what you're interested in within the industry. So for today's session, I'm delighted to be joined by three fantastic panelists, each who have successfully navigated their way into the industry, but all in a really different way. We'll explore the different training pathways and routes into the industry, how they got there, and as well as their top tips and advice for aspiring professionals. Ultimately, we want to make sure that you get the most out of this session. Navigating your way into the industry can sometimes seem daunting and overwhelming. And as you'll find out today, each of our panelists have all been in your shoes. So we'll be keeping this session interactive. If you've got any burning questions at all, then please put them into the chat. And between us, we'll do our best to answer as many questions live as we can. So before we get started, let me start by introducing my fellow panelists. So Craig, let's start with you. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us what your background and your role is in the industry?
Yeah, so hi everybody. So obviously my name's Craig. I historically worked, I did spend about 20 years in retail, actually hospitality as a general. I started off kind of within the pub restaurant environment, did that for about 10 years, and then moved into retail and manufacturing for Krispy Kreme. Worked for them for another 10 years. Plenty of commitment there, and then made the decision to kind of take back my career a little bit, and then trained and worked my way into cyber.
Fantastic. And what's your role today?
So I'm the SOC manager at Norm.
Fantastic. Thank you, Craig. Tamsin, you're next on my screen. Do you want to do a little intro into who you are?
So probably a lot shorter than everyone else's. I am a SOC analyst right now, right down at the baby beginner level. I was hired as an apprentice by Cybersecurity Associates, and they basically snatched me up right out of my A-levels, so literally no experience. It was my first job. Well, it is my first job. I am still employed.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tamsin. And last but not least, Nicole.
So my background started off in science. I worked in the NHS for 10 years. I then left to become a mum. I started my own online jewellery business in that time. And then I've now retrained into cyber, and I work in IT GRC for PwC. Lots of letters there. But yeah, so I'm just kind of beginning my journey. I'm in my first 5 months of working within the industry.
Amazing. Awesome. Thank you. So Nicole, as we're at you, I'd like to just dive a little bit more into, the journey that you took into the industry. Each of you obviously have come in via different routes, which is really the purpose of this session today, is just to really highlight the diversity of paths that exist, and just to provide a little bit of confidence to our audience that, you can come from kind of any background, into this industry, and that there are different options available to you, because obviously each option is going to suit, different needs, etc. So Nicole, as you mentioned, you came through a sort of boot camp route. Would you mind sharing a little bit about which one that you chose, and also how you come to find out about them?
And so I went with a company called CapsLock. They're kind of reinventing the whole training and reskilling into cyber. I found them through my husband. My husband works in cyber, and he. So a friend of his posted it on LinkedIn, and he said, I think you should have a look at this. This will be really good for you, because I've got a very kind of logical brain, and I was at a point where I wanted a new career, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I think when you look at cyber from the outside, you think it's all very technical, and you don't realize that there's so many other avenues that you can go down. And that's what Capstock were really good at showing and highlighting, that it's not just coding in a dark room wearing a black hoodie. Like, there is a wealth of jobs out there that you can do. So yeah, I really liked their ethos is very much kind of giving you lots of different flavors into cyber and then letting you pick which path you want to go down.
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of gives you a really good view of, you know, all the different multidisciplines, etc., doesn't it?
Yeah.
What attracted you to them? Because obviously there's lots of other, sorry to interrupt you, but there's, as you know and probably looked at, is, you know, there's quite a lot of different organisations out there sort of doing similar things. What I guess what attracted you to Caps Lock?
There was a couple of aspects. One was that they were very focused on getting women and minorities into the industry and kind of breaking those barriers that you see. Like, it is a very male dominated industry, and seeing the worth of a woman and kind of what they can bring, and really highlighting that, and having female founders as well and people who have been there and having that inspiration was really key. But to be honest, it also came down to the financial aspect and the way they work their financing model, in that you pay once you're in a job. And I really like that, because they weren't just after your money to give you training and then leave you. They were very much focused on the whole path and making sure that you did make a success and you did get to the end of it. And I just really like their ethos about supporting people.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually, Nicole, because, you know, there are a lot of people out there looking at those different options and finding them inaccessible, quite honestly, you know, and we've got people that are interested from all different walks of life. So, you know, to be in a position where, you know, you can train, you earn certifications from that course as well, don't you?
Yeah, so there's 4 certifications, but it was part-time as well. So being a mum of 3, I could do it once my children were in bed. It was done in the evenings over space of 6 months, and it didn't affect any kind of daytime activities with the kids, or at the same time I was still working doing the jewelry, so I was still able to do that whilst training. So there was a lot of benefits from doing it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you talked about sort of some of, I guess, the perceived barriers to entry into the industry. I'd just like to sort of go into that a little bit deeper, if that's okay. So in terms of that, I think, you know, as you mentioned there, the industry sort of can be depicted as very technical, very dark, mysterious sometimes. Is that, you know, and to your point, you know, you mentioned that that's kind of the view that you got. Has kind of going through this route sort of opened your eyes? I know you mentioned, you know, there's different options, etc. But, you know, sort of into the industry that, and actually, you know, there are more women present and, you know, working in roles that aren't just technical in the industry. And have you perceived any, you know, are there any other barriers that you kind of perceived or that you experienced, you know, sort of on your journey?
I think there's the whole kind of, everyone says that there's lots of jobs out there, but you have no idea what to apply for, what to look for in a job description. I think the job descriptions themselves are quite mysterious, and when you're kind of coming into the industry, they can seem very daunting. They've got things on there that I wouldn't know. And I think it's about being brave, and it's about stepping out of your comfort zone, but also using the network around you. Like as you were saying, there are women in tech, and they're so willing to help. There's none of this queen bee syndrome of I know the knowledge, I'm at the top and nobody else is coming with me. Like, they are absolutely dragging everyone along with them, and they want to help. So just reach out to the community out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, sort of through your journey, did you face any personal challenges, whether that be through, you know, sort of, you know, that starting point or kind of later on down the line when you were kind of starting to look at roles and opportunities or going through the kind of the interview process?
Yeah, I mean, I had the general wobbles of, I didn't know if this was gonna give me anything. I'm a mum of 3 living in the middle of the countryside who's middle-aged. Like, it's really difficult to see how anyone's going to employ me. So that in itself is a barrier, and just the mental barrier and getting over that. I did have interviews where I felt like I was a statistic, in that they just wanted to make sure that they had a woman who was being interviewed, but they had no interest in giving me the job. And it was quite clear afterwards that I was put in that situation, and that does knock your confidence. But then you do have those other interviews where you're just like, that was amazing, like I can do this. This is the industry for me. I think it's important to remember with interviews that you're interviewing the company as well as they're interviewing you, and if you're not the right fit for the company, then there's no point pushing a round peg into a square hole.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really, really good point. It works both ways at the end of the day. And if you're put through a process that can sometimes put you off, then perhaps they're not the right organisation for you, right? So, you know, try not to let that knock your confidence in any way. And that can be, you know, the same could be said for any industry, let's face it. You know, I've worked in recruitment for best part of 18 years, and, you know, it happens across all industries, etc. They're just not the right business for you. And going back to your point, in terms of knowing potentially where your place is in the industry, etc., Nicole, and it's something you and I have discussed in length before, is being a mum, as I am also, is you've got those challenges of school. You know, what do I do with my children? You know, sort of, sorry, there's a technical issue there. Sorry if I cut it.
Oh, well, I think what Natasha was getting at anyway is about school holidays and balancing being a mum. And again, I think it comes down to finding the right company and just being brave and saying from the outset, I do have 3 children, I do have commitments, and certain company cultures will allow for that. So some are still old school, that's just nature of it, but there are some out there that are really progressive, and they want that, they understand the skills that a mum brings. And kind of like when you're a mum, like your timekeeping is on point, you know exactly kind of your organisation skills are insane. And I think it's really easy when you're a mum as well to forget about what other skills you do bring to the table, because it's so easy for them to be lost.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that conversation around square peg, round hole is really, really relevant, because just as much as people are diverse, companies are diverse. And
Absolutely.
I don't think, you know, it's not a one size fits all, isn't it? It's just as much about finding what's right for you as opposed to just finding any old role or job, I think.
Absolutely. And that was one of my key things when I went into the industry, is I wanted to find the right job, not the first job. I had a few interviews, and some of the companies, they just weren't for me. And that's fine, because I'm not for everybody either. So I think that's just life. And I found a role which is not tech orientated, but I'm still working in cyber. I'm still using the skills that I learned on my course, but without having to do coding or Linux or anything like that, because I think that is such a dominating thing, that people think that is all that cyber is about. And it is such a wide, like, it's an ocean of different jobs and different skill sets out there.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. I think, you know, you look at the roles that are out there. I was very similar to you in that I thought that, you know, it was very much, you know, red team, blue team, those kind of things. You know, you've got ethical hackers, you've got kind of people who defend networks, and that was the majority of it. And the reality is, there's a lot more. There's project management roles there. You know, it's such a diverse field, where, you know, there are people who, you know, have to spend a lot of time researching what they want to go into. And that time's always well spent, I think.
Absolutely. I think that's where boot camps are quite handy, is that they give you that flavour without going into too much depth. So they let you do that research on your own afterwards. They give you that taste, and then you kind of go off on your own, rather than you being kind of tunneled down a certain route. Certainly when I looked at university courses, it wasn't an option for me. Yeah.
Hi folks, I'm back. Sorry about that. Little technical hitch on my end. So, Nicole, sorry, I caught the tail end of some of that discussion there, which was absolutely on point. I'd love to hear about your role now, you know, within GRC, just as a high level, to give our audience a bit of a flavour in terms of, you know, what does a role in GRC involve? What are some of the kind of, you know, daily tasks that you're involved with?
So I have 2 aspects of my job. I deal a lot with the governance, and I deal a lot with risk. So the governance side is with an initiative within my company to give the CISOs a voice, and kind of working with them and kind of making them do things without realizing that they're doing it. I think that's the kind of key with governance, is to get everybody on board, but without feeling like it's force-fed. And then with the risk side of it, we look at a lot of penetration test results, find out what holes are there within applications, and then work with the teams within the business to find ways to remediate those holes, so that everything is secure and safe. So I have two aspects. I'm quite lucky on that front. But none of it is kind of technical. There's no coding, but still using a lot of the knowledge that I've learned along the way.
And that's really, really interesting. You know, obviously you've got a role there that sort of, you know, works very, very closely with the business. You know, as you say, you're not technically hands-on from that perspective, although you're probably constantly looking at information, etc. From your previous career, have you sort of at this point identified, you know, some of your core skills and how they're actually so relevant in your current role now? Is there any sort of those skills that you were doing in your previous life, your previous career, that you find yourself sort of doing in this role now?
Absolutely. Like, so with the laboratories, and when I was a scientist, there was a lot of the compliance and risk aspect. It was done in a different context, but it's still the same kind of base level underneath. But even just from being a mum and just being able to talk to people and organize things, portray kind of different points of view and listen to people, like all of those skills can be brought from any industry, but they're all relatable in some way. I think people out there get so lost in not having certain qualifications or certain certifications that they forget about all of the soft skills that they have and they've developed over the years, and just the perseverance to kind of go on this journey to retrain and to train into an industry like that in itself is applaudable.
Yeah, absolutely. And that answers quite well into a question that we have from a lady in the audience called Tabitha. She's about to graduate with a degree in cybersecurity, but still doesn't feel she knows sort of quite where she'll fit in. She'd love to graduate to a role that actually, you know, and actually get some, I guess, practical experience. And have the opportunity to find out more about kind of different roles. She's a single mum. She doesn't live near a big city. She can commute, but obviously she can't relocate. I think we can all sort of, you know, understand where you're coming from there and really resonate with that. I think from my perspective, and, you know, some of our panelists here might be able to answer this as well, it's just getting a sense of what have you done previously. You know, I think it's really helpful to do a bit of soul searching and have a dig into, you know, what are you good at, what are your core skills, and then looking at some of the roles that are available today in terms of job adverts or roles that you are familiar with. You know, how does that compare to those types of roles? You don't necessarily need the experience. It's just about sort of demonstrating those core skills that you have and how they're potentially transferable into that sort of role. In answer to your question in terms of your location, you know, the pandemic has changed a lot for us in terms of, you know, there's a lot more opportunities out there where you can work part-time or where you can work mostly remotely, etc. And you'll be surprised by the companies that aren't just in the major cities. Actually, there are a lot of cybersecurity organisations, end user or end clients outside of major cities as well. Does anyone have anything they want to add to that at all before I move on?
I would just add that, as you said, like lots of office, like certainly for the company I work for, we've got offices up and down the country, but they're also really big on working from home. And I think that the pandemic on that front has been a real blessing, because they have seen that people are just as productive from home as they are from the office. I've worked for my current company for 5 months and I've only been to the office twice, but I still get my job done every day. So I think people are a lot more open to that now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Nicole. That was really insightful. Tamsin, let's come to you. Hi. So you've come through a really interesting route as well. And you've come through the apprenticeship route, you know, fresh out of studies and your A-levels. So you're a spring chicken in this industry. And it's fantastic to see, because, you know, we want to see more like you know, coming in at, you know, a real grassroots level into the industry, you know, through studies, through apprenticeships. And I think apprenticeships we don't hear an awful lot about. So it'd be really good to kind of dig in and just learn a little bit more about what you're getting from this apprenticeship. So how long is the apprenticeship that you're doing?
So it's 3 years, and I'm like halfway through my second year now. But the first year, basically, because it's for anyone coming into the degree, so we have a lot of people who have like families, we have a lot of people who like have never even touched a computer in their lives. The first year is basically sort of like a throwaway year, like just to get you to grips with sort of the concepts that they're going to be covering. And now I'm in the serious bit where it counts.
In terms of that first year and concepts, just to dive in a bit deeper, I suppose, what do you mean by that? Just for our audience that may not quite understand what that means.
So mainly it's just like, I mean, for me, the first hurdle was like business reports, because obviously the apprenticeship it's got to cover a lot of bases, because, you know, the roles that are available are so wide and varied that when you get down to teaching it, just cybersecurity is quite general. So we started with things like business reports, which tripped me up because I was like, oh, I code. Whoa, come on, guys. But as we got further into the year, it gets more into the classic, like there's been a malware breach in a network. Can you look through the logs to see, you know, the indicators of compromise, stuff like that, you know, try and identify which CVE it was, which for me was a lot easier than the rest of the stuff. But for some of the other students who'd never done tech stuff, it was really difficult. So it helped not only just to show us like this is sort of what we're going to be covering throughout the 3 years, but also because we sort of all identified who knew what and who to go to for help on certain stuff. So yeah, it was a good year. And the grades not counting was also very good.
So this is a 3-year apprenticeship, a degree apprenticeship, isn't it? Because I know there's different ones out there. So the one that you've taken is the degree apprenticeship. And at the end of that, you get what kind of degree?
I have a bachelor's of cybersecurity.
Wow.
Yeah.
And is there any there is no financial element to that from your side, is there? The business actually takes on that cost and that funding, is that correct? So
Yeah,
you're placed in an organisation.
Yeah, so for CSA, I think because we're so small, we don't have, I've forgotten what it is, but basically if your company is big enough to have a lot of apprentices, they have to put their own money into it. But because we're so small, I think it's funded directly from the government, which is pretty neat because, I mean, some of the other guys in my office have like 50K in debt and stuff. And, you know, they quit without the degree. It was just their choice, which of course we respect, but oh my God, 50K in debt, I would just start melting. But I get to leave this with pretty much no debt at all, which is great.
Yeah, and you come out with, I guess, you know, the benefit is the practical experience that you've got. You've got 3 years of practical experience and apprenticeship degree at the end of it, which kind of really sets you up for your future, doesn't it? When you were at school, Tamsin, were you quite sort of technically minded? Were you always tinkering with computers or anything, or is this completely fresh for you?
Well, it's funny. When I was picking my GCSEs, I was going to go into art because I wanted to work in fashion. And me and my friend went to go see James Bond. I've forgotten which one was out, but I used to dress like Q did in the film with the sweaters and like the little ties and stuff. And they jokingly were like, "Oh, you're like Q," and it was a whole joke because I didn't do anything with computers. And then I can't remember what happened with the art GCSE, but I didn't take it in the end. And I was like, you know what? I'll do computer science. It'll be a big joke. And it turned out I really clicked with it. I got really into like cryptography and, you know, Bletchley Park and like Alan Turing and all those old figureheads and stuff. And it just really sparked some creepy little interest in me. And yes, they still call me Q. It fits better now.
And do you get much time outside of, you know, because I guess you've not only your hands on, you're doing a sort of a day job, as it were, and then having to do some studies, you know, towards your degree, etc. Do you get any time outside of all of that to do some sort of, you know, self-directed kind of outside learning, etc.?
I would say that's the one negative of the apprenticeship, is that the workload is so intense that even if you know, I can book time off work, but the apprenticeship does not care about that. It will just keep going. So it is a bit of like, you know, everyone seems to struggle a lot, especially because the materials we get are, in the interest of fairness, I imagine, just from the actual course. So we get a lot of assignments that are like, would be given to someone doing like a summer placement at a company. So they would obviously have just the job to focus on in that time. But we obviously have like the job and the assignments and this new assignment. So it can just really pile up. And I think for me, it's all right because, I mean, I'm 19. I don't do a lot of stuff outside of work and school. But I mean, for the people who I learn with, who have like families and stuff, or have to travel quite a distance to get to the uni, I think it must be a real big strain on them. And they obviously don't complain all the time about it, but you do pick up a bit. Because, I mean, if it's difficult for me, add one more thing onto your load, it must be just a real backbreaker for 3 years.
Yeah. When you're trying to balance family life and all of those other commitments that potentially come with that as well. The other students within your course, as it were, I get the sense there that they're actually a mixture of ages. They're not all sort of 18 to 21-year-olds. Is that right?
Yeah, I think me and another girl are like the youngest people there. We have a lot of people, some of them who it's like their second bachelor's, or some of them, I think one of them's even done a master's at some point and it's just come back for the apprenticeship. It's just a case of some of them want to retrain, some of them, their work just wants them to do it because it looks really good. And for me, obviously, it was just, I think I asked CSA, like, do you guys do apprenticeships? And they were like, sure. And then they just whipped this one out, which was a really good fit for me, at least.
Fantastic. And I guess just lastly, touching on your role in the industry, so the kind of practical hands-on side of things, can you tell our listeners what your role is in the industry, and a bit of a high level in terms of, you know, what are some of your core responsibilities in that role?
Yeah, so I'm a SOC analyst at work, which is my main role in the office, although we are a small company, so we cover a lot of bases. It seems to be everything in my life. But as SOC analyst, it's a bit like being sort of like a 999 call handler for incidents, in that, you know, something comes in and you'll get like a ticket that says, you know, this is all the stuff that we've noticed has gone wrong, and you have to go look into it. Then you get a bit Sherlocky and you're looking through a bunch of clues, trying to figure stuff out. And it's up to me to decide, do we have to raise this to a client? Do we have to call a client and say there's been a really severe incident here? Or can we just go, this looks like expected behavior? But aside from that, we also do, you know, malware reports, threat reports. And because I'm the apprentice, I do a lot of social media stuff and, of course, a lot of outreach stuff, just to really get some feelers out in the community and network a bit.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tamsin. And as our audience can see, you're not sat in a very dark room with a big hoodie on. You're maybe slightly technical, but you're not a hooded coder in a dark room. Lovely to talk to you. Thank you, Tamsin. Craig, let's move on to you. So where do we start? So as you highlighted in your intro, your background was very much in the sort of retail hospitality industry. Can you just give us a bit of an overview in terms of, I guess, obviously working in that industry for so many years, that was ultimately your career. What made you flick that switch? What made you think about, oh, I'm going to go into tech or cybersecurity or what have you?
Yeah, I think initially, I think the first thing to point out was that I as a career, I kind of fell into, as a lot of people do when they come out of study, they kind of don't really know what direction they want to go into. I definitely didn't at 17, 18. And I was working in hospitality for pocket money at the time, pardon me. And it just kind of stemmed from there, really. So I spent, kind of 20 years of my career working in something that I did enjoy, but never really, I would say, I didn't get the daily challenges that I'm getting now. And I think I got to a point where I wasn't quite getting the job satisfaction. I started questioning why I was in it in the first place. And then my little boy came along. So I had my first son. So my partner had my first son. She'd be very quick to correct me there. And that just kind of changed everything, really. So my last role within hospitality, I headed up the new store openings program for Krispy Kreme, which meant that I was traveling all around the country. I lived my life on the road. I'd be away from home anywhere up to kind of 3 months at a time at peak, which obviously puts a strain on my partner. So I kind of, all those things considered, I just kind of decided that actually I was going to start to look at, taking my career back, really. And that's where it stemmed from. That's how I kind of got to the point where, I was kind of just thinking, what do I actually want to do? How do I get back the work family life? How can I work in an environment that challenges me every day, that I can learn something new for the next 20 years of my career? And that's kind of how I landed in cyber, really. That's how I kind of ended up in that kind of that direction.
Because for someone who doesn't have a background in, say, IT or any kind of project management from a systems or technology point of view, I always find it fascinating to learn how, how did you know about cyber, and also what gave you the confidence to explore it more?
Yeah, I think, so I started off, I had quite a broad range of career research, really. So I considered some things. I've done a little bit of HR work within my previous roles. So I considered HR, and I've always quite enjoyed tech. I wouldn't say that I am, I was incredibly techy. I've never coded or anything like that, but I've always been quite natural with tech. So I kind of started off down an IT route, and then as I started to look at that, I started to come across more and more around cyber careers. And the more I looked into that, the more I kind of thought, actually, this is absolutely where I want to be. It's a huge, it's a very quickly growing industry, which will lay out opportunities in the future, and it's not going away anytime soon. There's good, month on month, there's more need for cybersecurity. You just look at what's happening in the world at the moment. That in itself has led to a bit larger needs, and I just kind of felt, as I said, that the industry itself is so diverse that there's always opportunity to learn something new, and that is really something that really appealed to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've spoken to Nicole, who took on sort of boot camp style learning, and Tamsin here, obviously went through the apprenticeship route. We've got those that retrain and think about going down university route. You didn't do any of those.
I didn't. No, I did not.
So what did you do? Where did you start? And how did you know where to start?
Yeah, so I, as part of my research, I just came across some quite a handful of training companies where you can kind of learn at your own pace. So it's self-study. So given my personal circumstances, I wasn't in a position where I would leave my job tomorrow to go away and study or anything. I had a family, I had a mortgage, and all the other kind of things that come with being a grown-up. And that just really kind of felt like that was my best avenue in, I guess, is because I was on the road quite a lot. So I would get to a hotel room at 7, 8 o'clock at night, and I would spend 2 or 3 hours in the evening kind of studying, and I utilized that time, and that's how I kind of came to that, really, because university wasn't an option for me and apprenticeship wasn't an option for me, so that was kind of a best fit for me, really.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you manage with, sort of that, I guess, obviously when you got your role at Norm, how did you manage with the difference in kind of, I guess, pay scale? And this is also tying a little bit into Catherine's, one of our audience members here, Catherine's sort of question is, she's worked in senior management, very similar to you, worked in, but obviously in a different capacity. She's reskilling, retraining. But, looking at a lot of the roles out there, it's almost like, oh, you have to get into an entry level. It's not always the case, is it? There are people and individuals that do go into, it might be marketing and cybersecurity, or it might be, you might be getting into kind of cybersecurity awareness type roles and things like that align to those types of skills. But how did you manage with, sort of taking that slight dip in salary?
Yeah, it was relatively substantial for me, unfortunately, and I kind of looked at it as a short-term pain for a long-term gain. I think it's very, very common. Everybody knows that cybersecurity, as a general rule, pays pretty well within the industry, and that's from comparable entry-level roles across other industries. So I was always very confident that I would kind of get back what I'd lost. But it was up to me to do that, So I kind of used it as a bit more motivator more than anything else. I started off and things were a little bit lean, of course they were, but as time goes on, as I said, you use it as a motivator. You kind of use that when you're in positions where you may want to take a night off, you don't particularly want to study that night, or whatever it is. I just use that as a bit of a motivator to kind of help me progress in a kind of quicker format.
And progress you have. So you started off, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, around 14 months ago as a SOC analyst, and you've recently been promoted into the role that you're in today. Would you mind sharing that with us and what that role looks like now?
Yeah, so I started off, obviously, as you say, as a kind of junior SOC analyst, I guess, or tier 1, as some people would call it, and very similar to Tamsin. It's alert management, assessing alerts, using kind of OSINT techniques, or open source intelligence, kind of doing the Sherlock piece, and kind of analyzing those alerts and kind of then dealing with customers on a face-to-face basis, either through their requests or through feeding back through your own alerts. Then around November, I was then promoted into a senior analyst position, where I was then the escalation point for the junior guys. So should they come across anything they weren't confident in working their way through, I was a support mechanism for them. I then started to get into things like, kind of tuning of the tools we use to make sure we don't see kind of as many false positives, and dealing with probably more intricate customer requests. Customer onboarding, so I started picking up those kind of things as well, where we start to deploy our tools out to customers' environments as and when we kind of pick up their contracts. And then I started to work with the team as well through kind of developing training plans for the junior guys, just leaning back into my previous history of kind of my managerial career. And then, as you very rightly say, as of kind of January, I was then promoted into the SOC manager role. And now that's very much more around kind of organization of workflows within the team, roles and responsibility setting, team one-to-ones, team trainings, personal development plans, service delivery standards, and kind of meeting KPIs, team scheduling, and then being the additional escalation point for the kind of tier 2 senior analysts then as well. So we have that within the function. And then I still kind of do the onboarding pieces and kind of assist out on those levels as well. But I think that's a general summary, I think. So yes, it's escalated. It's moved along quite quickly, and I've definitely learned a lot.
Amazing to hear from you all. We are coming to the end of this session, sadly, and I think it's one of those topics and sessions that we could probably spend more than 40 minutes on. There's a lot of questions here which I and the rest of the panelists will try and answer after this session. But I guess to close this off, if I could come to each of you and just ask any of your kind of top 3 tips for navigating into the industry. Craig, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think key things. So I think understand that it will be difficult. I think it is a challenge. So you need to be resilient. You need to understand that not everybody is going to want to take a gamble on you. From an employer's perspective, they've got 2 CVs in front of them. They've got somebody who's not worked in the industry versus somebody who already is. So it's up to you to make them choose you over the easy option. And you do that through networking, getting to know people. Don't just be a CV on a pile. And then, and also try and get as hands-on as you can to try and bridge that gap, because that's going to be the difference between the two CVs. So work out ways to do that, whether it's building your own home labs, whether it's kind of hands-on training. Things like Security Blue Team, for example, is really good in that it's not QA, it's not multiple choice questions. And I think they're the two key things: is be resilient. You're going to get knockbacks, but you keep working at it, you will get there, and understand the differences from an employer's perspective, and work out how you're going to navigate that. And people within the industry, I can genuinely say there are a lot of great people out there who are willing to offer you help and advice, and absolutely utilize that as well. I could have a load more, but I'll leave it for everybody else.
Thank you, Craig. Tamsin, your sort of final remarks, please.
I'd probably say just remember that everything you do when you're doing this career change or just starting off, you're doing it just, for yourself, and as long as you're confident in yourself and you're not just doing it to, don't go into a workplace and think, I've got to be friends with everyone. I've got to be, the best at my job. I've got to be pushing down all of the like check marks that they've got. I've got to be doing everything right all the time for them. The only person that you need to have faith in and need to believe in is yourself, because you're always going to be there for yourself. But employers, I love my employers, but at the end of the day, it's a warm body, isn't it? But as long as I have faith in who I am and where I'll go, that will lead me to great places.
Amazing. Thank you, Tamsin. And Nicole?
I would say utilize the network, use LinkedIn, reach out to people, ask people meaningful questions. Don't just ask them, do you have a job? Ask them how they got into the industry. Ask them questions about themselves and their journey, and have those meaningful conversations. Like, be interested, be intrigued. And back to what Craig said, like, be resilient, but also realize that you've got so many other qualities. You might not know everything about cybersecurity, but you have so many transferable skills that you might not even realize, but they are what employers are looking for. They can teach you the knowledge. They can't teach you how to do teamwork or communicate or time management. That's all down to you. And that's the stuff that you already know. You've got it.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you to our amazing panelists for sharing their backgrounds and their journeys into the industry, and we hope the audience has found that informative, and provides you with some comfort to know that there are many different options out there that exist, different types of roles, etc. Please feel free to reach out to myself, and I'm sure the panelists would agree that they're happy for you to reach out to them too on LinkedIn with any further questions that you have. We'll always be happy to help. But thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.